Hello and welcome to our first COVID Aid live Q&A. We're going to be hosting regular events on COVID-related issues on our new COVID community platform. And we wanted to start off with a subject of great relevance to those with long COVID. I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Oakley, the Executive Director of Abscent, the UK charity supporting people with smell disorders, something which has been a prevalent symptom of long COVID. So hi, Sarah. To begin, It would be great to hear a bit more about yourself and your role at Absent.
Yes, I came on board with Absent was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So it was a real baptism by fire. Absent was set up as a charity back in 2019. So we were already there on the ground, and smell disorders through viral loss, but also things like head injuries, nasal problems, been around for a long time, but just not the interest in them. But that meant that Absent was there to help people when they started having questions about what's happening to me here. So it's been great to be able to put people's mind at rest and to be able to provide them with trusted information in a time where nobody really knew what was going on.
And for those of us who don't have so much awareness, what type of smelling disorders are there?
So it can vary across a whole spectrum. Anosmia is total smell loss. So you really don't smell anything at all. Maybe you detect tiny little whiffs of things, but to all intents and purposes, you don't have any smell. And consequently, probably don't have any taste either, because what we know as taste is actually flavour, which comes from what we smell. So that's usually what people notice first, that they can't taste anything. But that's all to do with their sense of smell. So anosmia is where you completely lose your sense of smell. And then hyposmia is not so good smell. It's, it's not at the gold standard of smell, but you can smell some things, you can taste some things, but it's not very reliable. And then we have a strange condition called parosmia. And this is often happens as part of the healing process, but this is where smells become very distorted and quite often very disgusting. So what you usually see as something enjoyable, perhaps your morning cup of coffee, will actually trigger those feelings of repulsion in you, and that's parosmia. And then people might also experience phantosmia, which is smelling things that they know aren't there. And quite often this is reported as a smell like cigarette smoke or burnt rubber, those kind of things. They tend to be short-lived and quite obviously not in that environment, but it's something that people will experience.
And in terms of these types of smelling disorders, when did Absent first notice that people who had COVID-19 were also experiencing this type of altered sensing?
Yeah, well, as I say, smell loss from viral causes has been around as long as we've been having viruses. So it was only really when people started coming into the Facebook group in March saying, oh, I had this strange thing, felt a bit under the weather, now I can't smell or taste anything, what's going on here? And they started piling into the Facebook group, and we suddenly realized, I think it was probably around the 20th of March, that we needed to set up a separate group for them. So there's the Absent COVID-19 smell and taste loss group, because although we understand a lot about post-viral smell loss, this was a whole new experience for a large group of people. So we wanted to be sure that people were able to get the support that they needed, tailored to their needs.
And can you tell us a bit more about that community and then also the research that you've been doing into the subject?
Yeah, well, when we look into treating smell disorders, there's no medicine, there's no treatment that you can get from the doctor. There are smell training, which we'll go into a little bit more, I hope it shortly, but also just that connection with other people who are going through the same sort of experience is really important. So this is why we had the Facebook group before COVID, so that we could give people that opportunity to interact with others that were going through the same sort of things. And that also, it gives you some confidence in what you're experiencing. You're not going mad, you're not alone, but also not having to explain to everybody the impact that this has on you, because it's quite it's quite life-changing, really, when you can't taste anything, when you can't smell anything, you don't interact with people in the same way because you're not picking up those same sort of signals with them. So to be able to come together and have that peer support was really important.
And with that community, what are some of the main areas of difficulty that they've identified?
Well, first of all, people coming in just not understanding what's going on for them. And they will talk about things like this Pantosmia, the cigarette smoke or the smell of burnt rubber. Is that happening for anybody else? They'll talk about how everything was normal and then it was like a light switch being switched off, and suddenly they couldn't taste or smell anything. Obviously, people are saying, how long does this last? Is this permanent? Am I going to be like this for the rest of my life? So to be able to answer some of those questions, so that people knew that they weren't suffering anything more sinister, is really important. But what we found is a sort of pattern of COVID, and this has come out of this Facebook group initially, and then other communities that we have online, like the Abscent network. And what we see is a pattern where people will lose their sense of smell and taste through COVID. Now, most people, 90% of the people that lose smell and taste will get it back normally and naturally within 2 to 3 weeks. There's nothing to worry about. And that is the majority of cases. That's 9 out of 10 people. But for that 1 out of 10 person for whom it doesn't come back, it's likely to be a long haul, because what's happened is in your nose, the olfactory neurons, the things that sense the odor molecules, have been affected by the virus, and the cells around them have been attacked by the virus. And so it's all a bit sort of melty and not working very well at all. And that's why you can't smell anything. Now, the good news is that all of these cells in your nose are designed to regrow. So they are growing back. But it's a healing process, and it's something that takes time. And we find that in some cases it can be 2 or 3 years, although we find a lot of people will get a good sense of smell back sort of 6 to 12 months later. But it's not a quick thing, it's a healing process. So what we see with COVID in particular is that people will lose their sense of smell, completely gone, and that might be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a couple of months, and then it will come back and say, oh great, everything's good. And then almost as suddenly this parosmia kicks in. So this thing where common smells, people report coffee, garlic, baking bread, roasting meat, frying meat, really common smells suddenly trigger this intense disgust response in you. And it really makes some people actually physically sick. It's very difficult to cope with, especially when you don't understand what it is and where it's coming from. Now, the good news is it doesn't last forever. And in other viral conditions, it's been seen as a sign of recovery. So it's good news. We think it's these neurons kind of regrowing, and but they're a bit young and fresh, and they need to rewire. So it's that process, and everything's a little bit wonky while that's happening. But if you're not expecting that, again, it can really, really throw you, and it can physically affect what you can eat as well. So that's been a big problem for lots of people. Just when they should be taking nutritious diets to help their recovery, they're finding that there are some things that they simply cannot stomach. So it makes life tricky, really does.
Mm-hmm. And then do you find, I was really interested that recently, and when we were speaking online, that one of my friends actually suffers from kind of a smell disorder, but he hadn't told me, other friends, because he hadn't thought it was something worth mentioning, despite the fact that actually when I spoke to him about it, it's obviously had a big impact in his life, including the intimacy of shared experiences. So is that something that's common to people experiencing this?
Yes, lots of people don't want to make a fuss, or just find that other people don't understand, or quite often the response is, oh, well, you're lucky you can't smell anything, smelly socks and all those jokes, but it really is very disorientating when you can't smell anything. It's been described as living behind glass. You can see everything going on around you, but you can't quite get that interaction. And all those cues that we pick up, we use smell for danger signals as much as anything, smelling gas or food that's off, unpleasant environment, where rubbish has been left around, those kind of signals that says that, it's not healthy to be here. We lose all of those triggers, but also the more subtle stuff, like the smell of your partner or your family, those familiar smells that you find naturally comforting without particularly registering. So, living without that kind of those cues and those signals coming through is very disorientating, and it can be really isolating. This is something that we hear a lot from people. They just feel so isolated by what they're doing, by what's happened to them. So again, the online communities help combat those feelings of isolation.
And then, as well as the peer support, you mentioned smell training. So yeah, tell me more about smell training.
Okay, so there is no medicine currently. There's nothing that helps this healing process. It's just as if you break your leg has to heal. So your nose is healing. So there's nothing that can particularly help this from a medical point of view, but smell training has been shown to do that. There's been lots of studies, more than a dozen studies in the last 10 years, where smell training, which is essentially taking a little jar of fragrance, it could be an essential oil, but it doesn't have to be, it's something that you might recognize, and you do little bunny sniffs, and you do that twice a day, every day, and it probably needs to be done for about 3 or 4 months. So it's very simple to do, but it's about getting into the habit of doing it, because you have to do it regularly, like physiotherapy. So if you broke your leg, you'd be given some exercises to do every day. Smell training is the same sort of thing. And it is a long-term commitment. It is 3 to 4 months to start seeing a difference, but all the studies have shown that it does make a significant difference to recovering your sense of smell if you can do your smell training on a regular basis. So I think one study shows that a third of people, 1 in 3, will recover their smell naturally over 3 to 4 months without doing anything. But that number significantly goes up. 2 out of 3 are going to get their smell back more quickly if they do smell training. So it really is worth doing. And that it doesn't do you any harm either. So even if for some reason it's not going to work for you, perhaps because of the nature of your smell condition, just give it a go anyway, because chances are it will significantly help. So that's what we recommend, and there's lots of videos and information about that on our website at abscent.org. So, as I say, it's very simple to do. The trick is to be able to do it twice a day, and keep that habit going.
Yeah, I was about to ask the best way of getting started, but I think you just answered that there.
Yeah. Yes, you can buy smell training kits. You can make your own. You can even use things around the house just to get you started. Things that you're familiar with, like your shampoo, for example. You know what that smells like. You might not be able to smell it, but if you are taking those little bunny sniffs for about 20 seconds and thinking about that shampoo smell, thinking, what it feels like to wash your hair, you're strengthening that pathway between the nose and the brain, which means that you're going to recover your sense of smell much more quickly.
Fantastic. And now I'm going to ask some questions from our community.
Yeah.
And if anybody on the call wants to ask anything extra, do let me know. And I should also say a couple of questions are from people who are on the call. So if they want to chip in or ask follow-ups, then please feel free to do so. So yeah, our first question is from Raman, and she says, experiencing changes in smell, sometimes not being able to smell, and other times being able to smell only certain things, seems to crop up now and then. Please, can you explain why this happens and if it's common in long COVID?
Yes, it's a really common pattern. We see it quite a lot, but we describe them as fluctuations because it can come and go, and there's no real rhyme or reason for that. It's we just don't understand why, but we do know that it's really common to have these fluctuations. And recovery doesn't happen in a straight line. We would expect, if you're smell training, that each day or each week you're going to smell a little bit more, but unfortunately it doesn't happen that way. So you're going to have some good days, and then you're going to have days where you feel it's all gone back to square one and you're never going to get a sense of smell back. Those fluctuations are perfectly normal. Again, when you're not expecting it, can be a bit distressing, but we see this up and down recovery pathway all the time. So yeah, fluctuations are a normal part of the experience.
Mm-hmm. I think earlier you also mentioned about how this happens with other viruses as well, and I was interested in, does it happen as often with other viruses, or has there been a special kind of link observed with COVID and with long COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a feature of COVID. I mean, when you're looking at the research literature over the last 10 years, there have been literally a handful, half a dozen studies published into this particular aspect. And then you look at 2020 and 2021, and we're over 800 already. It's really something that's been very closely associated with COVID. But that's because COVID is something that we can see. We see the effect, whereas other viruses that have gone before, we haven't perhaps been so widely aware of the particular strains or the particular sources of those viruses. So we've not been able to make that clear link between a particular virus and losing your sense of smell. So we just don't know. But what's probably happening is some people are just more susceptible to losing their sense of smell post-virus than others. And again, why that should be, there's so much more research that we need to do there.
Yeah, and it seems to be one of those things where I guess a hope is, from this really challenging situation, that there can be more awareness around like smelling disorders and those types of things, especially when people are experiencing that. And I think, was it Piers Morgan? I've definitely seen some celebrities and some other people, prominent people, talking about this now, which is good.
Yes, and no, absolutely. It's very much in the public consciousness. I mean, when Abscent first started out, one of our biggest challenges was building awareness. And that was all changed around in March and April of last year. So people are very aware of smell and more of the impact as well. So in research terms, understanding what's going on with the biology in the nose, that's a longer term project, and understanding the biological effects of this virus on people will be unpicking for many, many years. But what we have been able to see very quickly over the last 12 months and a little bit longer is the impact that it has on people's lives, which hadn't been recorded before. So we know, as we talked about earlier, this sense of isolation, but people not being able to access professional support because it's just not enough was known about it. But in particular, the effects on eating, I mean, that really is the thing that changes people's lives. We hear people talk about the impact on their social lives. The thought of going out to eat with friends when you don't know if something might be brought to the table that makes you physically sick, that really starts to affect the way that you interact with people. So we see a bigger impact on people's social lives. The social aspect of sitting around a table in the first place and sharing a meal together, and that shared experience that people are missing out on quite a lot. So yeah, it's not just physically what you can eat, it's the experience of eating as well that people have recorded as a significant impact on their life. It really does affect the mood and your mood and the way that you interact with people.
Yeah, and I think I read recently about a chef who'd lost, I think it was his sense of smell, which, given his professional circumstance, I guess it can have that also work impact as well at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you think of chefs and sommeliers whose nose is their livelihood, really. But equally, you've got a whole range of people, particularly in the care community, for whom their nose is really important. If you're working with a patient and you can't smell aspects about that patient, whether they're unpleasant or not, you're missing important cues for your work. So it really can impact the way that you go about your job, as well as your daily life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And our next question is from Kerry, and she asks, Pantosmia is a common feature in long COVID for me. It was smelling cigarettes and burning fires. For others, it was smelling bleach. Could you explain how and why this happens?
I wish we could. We really don't have the depth of understanding into Pantosmia at the moment that we would like to. It is something to do with the way that the node or the brain is receiving the signals through that olfactory system, but exactly what goes on there, we just don't know. But yes, as you say, it is really common. People report it all the time, and sometimes it's not even a smell that you can describe. It gets labelled that COVID smell because it's just a very alien smell that you've not encountered before, and you couldn't necessarily put a finger on. But yeah, sadly, it is very common and hugely disconcerting, because if you can't see the source of it, you just don't really know what's going on there. So,
of course. And in terms of that, how and why, then would you say that with research that there's maybe been a lack of research? And I guess, would that be something that Abscent would like to see more of and try and investigate this?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the only way ultimately that we're going to be able to help people with smell and taste disorders is by finding a cure, and research is what gets us there. And obviously there's research going on into how the human olfactory system works and how it's affected by things like viruses. But there's also a lot of research going on into the impact on our well-being and the way that we communicate with our surroundings as a result of smell. So both elements are really important, because until we have the research that demonstrates that there is a problem, then we can't start to address the problem. So there's a long way to go, there's a lot to be done, but research is the only thing that's going to get us there.
And the final question at the moment, if there is any other questions from anybody else, do let me know. But the final question right now is from Sarah. And she asks, I have experienced distorted smell and often taste as a result of long COVID. And I believe as a result it has caused me to lose weight. Is this something that can happen? And if so, is there anything that can help in this respect?
Yeah, but we hear people having some quite dramatic weight changes as a result of what they can and can't eat. So for some people, if you can't smell anything, your appetite just disappears completely, and weight loss is very common. For other people, you can't get the satisfaction because you're not getting that taste that you're looking for. So they start to turn to things that are perhaps more salty or sweet, because those elements of true taste that happen in your mouth tend to be there even if you can't smell or taste the flavors. So that sort of satisfying the need for saltiness or sweetness means that some people are eating more and more of the wrong things. So that leads to weight gain. So this is a real problem consequence of having this altered eating condition, is that your diet is severely affected, and that's impact on you is quite extreme. So there are a few things to do. If you can't taste anything at all, then we encourage people to think about looking at the rest of their senses to enjoy a meal. So the colours on the plates that you use, the setting at the table, those visual cues that make things more pleasurable are really helpful. And then think about texture, think about crunch or smoothness, think about temperature, hot, cold, just to shake it up a bit, so you've got more of a sensory input than just taste alone. So that can help, but basically it's making sure that you eat regular meals, even if you don't fancy it. With parosmia, that's a little more complicated, because what we call trigger foods, so those things that create the disgust response, are found in They're compounds of molecules that are found in lots of different foods. So the same thing will be found in onions as it is in garlic, as it is in coffee. So you're not quite sure where it's going to come from. So there are lots of different foods that you might try that you really can't palate. There it is about understanding what your triggers are and working with that. At the very beginning, it's really tough to do, to manage. And so sort of bland foods, cool foods are the best way to go forward in the early days of parosmia when you really can't stomach anything. But you'll find that keep experimenting, because some things will be good some days, and what you were relying on last week unfortunately will change this week. So it is about experimenting, taking little portions. Again, foods that are cooler are usually more palatable, because that reaction of heating food is something that triggers those compounds that can be triggers for you. So cool foods are often helpful, and just keep experimenting. There's some debate about whether to push through or to avoid things that cause triggers for you. And we would always say, particularly in the early days, don't force yourself. You just need to get in some basic calories, which could be in the form of a flavorless nutrition shake or even ice cream, and just get in some calories to get you over those tough few days, and you will start to find things that you can tolerate better. And then as time develops and you become more confident about what you're eating and what your response is going to be, then yes, you can start pushing through. So take your cup of coffee, and the first sip might be really horrible, and the second sip might be not so good either. But by the third sip, you're getting used to it. And so you start to reconnect with your coffee and enjoy that caffeine experience once again. But it's slow steps. There's no roadmap for it. It really is be aware of your own body and your own responses.
Yeah, thanks so much for those answers to our questions, and thanks so much for joining us. To end with, it would be great to find out more about your plans for the future and where people can find out more about the work you're doing and become part of your community.
Yeah, so Abscent is here to provide trusted information on smell and taste disorders, not just COVID-related disorders. Brain injury, for example, is quite common, smell loss, and some signal conditions. So we are here to provide the trusted information, which you can get on our website. We're a community and we learn from each other. So for example, in our Absent network at the moment, which is free to join, there's lots of recipes going on. People are sharing what's working for them. So that's really helpful. But also that validation of what you're going through. You're not alone. You're not making it up. You're not making a fuss. This is really happening to you. And it's a chemical reaction that you can't control. It helps you to get people through. It can be quite distressing, and it can get you down. So to be able to speak to others who are going through it, that's really important. So we facilitate that peer support as well. But also research is really important to us. So it's involving our community in research. So, there's various papers that have been published over the last couple of years where our Absent community has shared their experiences that have informed researchers. So that's really powerful. But also people taking part in things like surveys or trials that are going on. That's really important too. So providing that link between the research community and those people who are actually going through it is really important for us. And we'd just like to raise a lot more money for research so that we can move things on much faster, because this is real, it's not going away, and it's a huge impact on people's lives. So we'd like to be able to change that very much so.